Welcome to Module 2 of the Fearless Farm Finances series. This module, we're going to look at goal setting and particularly planning for the farm that you want. So, key questions that we're going to address in this module is how can you plan your farm so that it gives you financial support that you need? How do you balance the need for economy and also plan for growth? And the third one is what kind of planning should you do? So we'll look at all of these components in planning for the farm you want. What do you as an individual need, or what does your family need? How much profit are you going to plan for? How much for yourself, or like I said, your family? How much production will that all take to meet the needs of your profit needs and your individual or family needs? Then, what is the capacity and flexibility of the farm that you either have or are planning for? How do you balance capacity, flexibility, and growth? What happens during those catastrophic situations, or how do we even plan for catastrophic situations? What does the total planning process look like? Getting help from an advisory team. When should you get help from an advisory team? And finally, developing the bigger picture of the business plan. So what do you need? A long-term plan goes beyond kind of the traditional business plan. Although business plans certainly are good things, farming is a little different enterprise, and the process that we want to take is that you also need to plan for what you need. In our experience with lots of farmers, and especially beginning and younger farmers, we found out that they struggle with coming up with a business plan as they get started because we don't know about the financial costs and we don't have a very good handle on what is the time required from the business. There's numbers out there and we can make some assumptions, but when we're first starting, it's hard. We don't have any history of our particular farm. So in the way that we like to start is that plan for your life needs and goals and then move from your farm specifics after you look at your own needs and wants. A good life plan will help you determine what you need from your business as well as actually what the business will need from you. So on the slide in front of you, it's looking at what originally from Zig Ziglar, he calls the wheel of life. And so you'll notice there's 8 different components to what he calls the wheel of life. So from career to financial to personal growth to health, family, relationships, social life, and attitude. All of these are important things, and you'll notice the wheel is numbered, and so there's some assessments, and if you want to take the assessments, if you just Google that, I'm sure you can find it, and there's all different kinds of questions related to each piece of this wheel. And you as a person are going to be driven in some of these, and some of these it's going to be a weakness. And realizing that as an individual, it's important to be as full on your wheel as possible. It's no different than driving a car or driving a bike. So on each of these, we say to set individual goals, make them as specific as you can possibly be, have them be measurable. With the measurability, make sure you have a time limit. If we say we want a profitable farm, great. What does that profit look like? Is that a yearly profit? Is that a monthly profit? What does that look like? Make sure the goals are yours. And we include your family. Each person in your farm, whether it's family or not, should do this and then maybe share it with each other because everyone's going to have different needs and be good with that and celebrate those differences. And then finally, make sure it's in writing. And there's a lot of research on this right now that the more you write it down, the more likely it is to happen. So, and then I always add share it. So once you start sharing some of this stuff, it makes you more accountable, or even just speaking it yourself puts it in another layer that you're more than likely going to move further along the pendulum on what you need and accomplish what you're looking for. So I'm gonna give you a quick example. So actually, one of my individual goals this year was, so I wanted to read one business related book per month. So when I look at what category this fits into, if I just said I want to read one book per month, maybe it wouldn't be in the career category. Maybe it'd be in the personal growth, or maybe it would be in my social life category. It depends on how you want to look at it. But I said I want to read one business related book. So I'm going to put that in the career category, and I want to create an action plan. So with each goal, I'd like you to think of just a couple things as an action plan. How are you going to accomplish that goal? So I said I want to select 3 books for my first quarter. So I already wanted to have the books for January, February, and March already picked out by the time the year started. I planned 30 minutes in my calendar. Some of you have to, you want to actually schedule that time into your calendar. For me, I knew I either wanted it to be the first 30 minutes of my day or the last 30 minutes of my day. And for some of us, the last 30 minutes can get iffy because we might actually fall asleep. Another part of my action plan was to ask others for the next 3 suggestions. So by the time February hit, I wanted to have my April, May, and June books already picked out, or at least some ideas of what I wanted to read, so that I knew I'd be more likely to reach my goal of a book a month if I already had my books picked out, and I could, if I needed to order them, I could order them. If I wanted to listen to them, I could listen to them. And then my target date was by the 30th of each month. I wanted to have the book for that month done. So, like I said, you want to select a goal, hopefully in every area, and maybe you have a couple goals in every area, and make sure that within your categories, if you have one category that you don't have any goals, I don't have any family goals. Well, some of you have heard of Dave Ramsey, and he'll tell you that if you don't have goals and you're not working in all of these areas of life, you kind of get a flat tire. And those of us in farming, you know what a flat tire sounds like. It's the lump, the lump, the lump, right? And that's kind of how your life starts sounding if we don't focus on areas that we need to be focusing in on. And not that you're going to focus every area every month, but that within a given time frame that we focus on everything, so that we make sure that we keep our life as full and as inflated as we possibly can be, in a good way, not inflated in a bad way. So having an action plan and a target date just makes it more achievable that you'll actually reach your goals. So goal setting, how much profit are you going to need from your farming operation? How much money do you want, or do you need? Some of us have already had personal obligations that we actually have some needs that need to be met. So it's not just how many dollars of produce do you want to sell, or how many pounds of meat, or 100 weights of milk. It's how many dollars of profit do you want from your farm to make on an annual basis. So a farm is a business, just like any other small owner-operated run business, and we would hope that your investment of time, energy, and money, you should also expect a reasonable rate of return, not just on the labor you're putting into running and managing the farm, but that you've made an investment and you've got risks that you've taken to be in this business. You should be able to reward yourself as well. So the other thing to take into consideration is, as you plan for a profit, you must take into account that your financial needs and wants are going to change over time, and aging tends to bring on added complexities and demands for financial resources. Or those of us who have kids understand that you just don't get done as much as you used to, or maybe it's a financial obligation that you're going to pay for childcare a few days a week so that you can get done what the farm demands from you. And then as you age even further, maybe we need more sleep. We're just not physically as geared up to put in 20-hour days, or even 10 or 12-hour days, or maybe you can do that for 3 months, but you don't want to do that for 12 months. So take into consideration that your needs and wants are going to change. Not that you can nail that down specifically, but just have that in the back of your mind. A profit versus cash flow. So if your farm is not profitable, even if it's providing you enough cash to live comfortably, you won't ever be able to pass it on to your children if that's all you expect from it. So if one of your goals is to pass the farm on to your children, you owe it to them to maintain a profitable operation, not just to having enough in the checkbook to pay all your bills, but really investing in that operation to make it profitable. So you want to be able to sell it to the next generation at market value, or you want them to make a decent living from it and have it set up so that they can do so that they don't have to invest heavily into it and hope that it makes a profit for them. So how much for yourself? A good way, if you don't know how much profit you need, a good way to start is just writing down every penny that you currently spend. After a few months, you're going to figure out how much money you are accustomed to spending and what categories are essential and what ones are non-essential. You'll be able to evaluate how your expenses change if you were self-employed. If I'm not self-employed, I'm going to have more miles. I'm going to need more fuel. I'm probably going to need to be dressed accordingly. Well, if I'm farming, I don't think you're going to need a suit and tie. Maybe you'll need a suit and tie if you want to present to someone fancy, but probably not. And you probably don't need to pay for commuting expenses on a day-to-day basis. So tracking, if you can track a full year, if you continue to track until you start farming, excellent. That will just provide you a better understanding of how much you actually need for yourself. What can you cut out of your budget? What do you not want to cut out of your budget, but really what's essential versus non-essential? You also want to develop an awareness of the benefits that you might lose if you leave your current job to become self-employed. Losing these benefits actually does come at a real cost, and healthcare is one that pops into everyone's mind. And secondly, retirement planning and debt payments. So some of you might come into the farming operation with student loan debt or vehicle debt or just personal consumer debt, and so you will have a factor of debt payments that come into your plan before you even start. So make sure that when you're figuring out how much for yourself, that if your health insurance is already being covered by a current employer, what does that look like if you become self-employed? What are those premiums for families? What are those premiums? Same thing, retirement plan, and then debt payments. From there, once we figure out those two things, flipped the slides too fast. How much production? So we're kind of working backwards from the take-home pay. And it's one way to do it, and then you can move forward or you can move backwards. And we're going to take the approach that, okay, we're going to work backwards from our take-home pay needs. So let's say that you want a total salary of $60,000. Maybe that's what you're accustomed to. Or you say, okay, we're making $100,000 now. We're going to cut back that we just want a take-home salary of $60,000. So I'm going to use the example of that you want to do a market vegetable garden. Market vegetable farm. And you're gonna figure that the average net farm income is between 30 to 40% of gross sales income. So, and you can kind of do that by just doing some checking online, seeing what other farms have been averaging the last 5 to 10 years. So you'll notice that 30 to 40% is a fairly large variation. So you decide you're going to take the middle ground and go 35%. So if you want $60,000 net cash income, you're going to take that income goal divided by the 35%, or 0.35. So you're going to figure out that this goal of $60,000 take home will lead you to a need for a gross income just under $171,000 or $171,500 per year to be exact. So remember that gross income is the total amount of money you take in before you subtract anything for cost of production or expenses. And that net farm income is the amount that you have left over after you take out those expenses. So in this case, $171,000 is the gross income. we're going to assume the average gross sale per acre of a market vegetable farm is around 14,000. So if we are producing 171,500 per year, and then we take it divided by the 14,000, you're going to figure out that you need about 12 acres of vegetables to achieve your net income of 60,000. So that's 171,500 of gross income divided by your 14,000 per acre that you found is what the average for a market vegetable garden farm is. So doing this figuring gives you an idea of how much land you'll need for your market farm, or you could do it on a dairy or any type of operation you need. You can find this information. The other thing it will tell you by doing this is what kind of labor structure you'll need. So if you plan to gross about 170,000 on a market farm in Minnesota, we know that the harvest season is probably about that 25 weeks, right? So it's going to run from June to October, or maybe you say May to September. So about 25 weeks. That means you're going to need to sell about $6,800 of produce each week in order to get your net farm income of $60,000 or your gross income of about $170,000. So you can do some back of the envelope figuring again and figure out about how many bunches of whatever crop that you're going to need to pick each week, and then what is the labor of that? How many hours do you have to figure, or how many hours is somebody else going to have to first seed it, then weed it, then wash it, then pack it, and then sell it. And so there are some of those resources, and if you look in the back of the Fearless Farm Financial book, you'll have some of those resources, or you can do some of that digging online as well. So you can do some quick back of the envelope figuring, and you're going to figure out what your land needs are, your physical capabilities, what skills, and any additional investments or capital purchases that you need. So one of the other questions I encourage people to quick ask is, can a person do that, or do we need a capital purchase to do that? Trying to build in capacity and flexibility is another really important factor that we need to consider when either starting or changing a farming operation, or even just on a day-to-day basis. So to continue farming successfully, you must balance capacity with flexibility. So capacity is described as the ability to perform or produce. So an example of that is in a milking parlor, how many cows per hour can we milk, or even on our equipment. I'm going to just give a tractor as an example. Tractors have a certain amount of horsepower rated for each tractor and for each attachment. So if you're looking to, let's say, weed a certain vegetable crop, how many acres per hour can a certain tractor with an attachment do on an acre per hour basis? So generally, capacity creates production flexibility, but it also takes away from your financial flexibility. So managing capacity presents just a fundamental challenge to any business. You have to have enough capacity to do the work that needs to be done when it needs to be done in a timely fashion, but you also don't want to waste money. None of us, and some of us, don't have money to waste, period. So extra capacity entails usually extra expense, not just for the initial capital outlay, so like I said, maybe that milking parlor or that tractor, but also what is the upkeep and maintenance on that. And the other thing to consider is if you have a tractor that's with a certain attachment, how many weeks of the year are you going to be using that? Technically, you have that tractor with attachment 52 weeks out of, you have it for a full year. How often will you use it? And will that same tractor run multiple attachments so that you can create flexibility in order to be more profitable, and also efficiency as well? So how do we balance capacity and growth? This is a common challenge on all of our farms, but just some lead points to consider. Keeping your overhead low. So can you find ways to get the work done without having to invest in additional equipment or infrastructure? You'll be ahead of the game right away from the start if you start looking at these types of questions, and if you can find ways to get the work done without having to invest in capital, it's a game changer. So for some people, custom hiring farm work done, whether it's tillage, making hay, anything that you can think is potential custom hire, means that you only have to pay for the acres covered or the bales made in those particular instances. So you only have to pay for that rather than paying on an equipment loan and saying that, yep, this piece of equipment we're going to have for the full year. However, on the reverse side, custom hiring fieldwork also might mean that you don't get everything done in the exact time frame that you would otherwise. So maybe you're going to hire a neighbor to do custom tillage, but you end up being on kind of his schedule as well as your schedule because your 3-acre market garden maybe isn't the highest priority on his list, but there's also a small price to pay for not having to pay for the upkeep and idle time on that particular piece of equipment. And maybe you don't have time, so that you get him along with the tractor and tillage piece of equipment. So there again, there's some other resources out there that if you're looking to say, all right, what might I hire someone to do a custom tractor driving or custom baling or custom tillage. In the book, in the Fearless Farm Finances book, they include this in the appendix, but you can also, Iowa State usually has a pretty good sample of custom hire rates as well. The other thing to consider in keeping your overhead low is renting land instead of buying it. So maybe you rent just what you need and you don't have to buy or purchase a whole farm and have half of it sit empty or have half of it that you need to try and get rented out. But you also don't have the option maybe to expand, or maybe you do. But as a bonus, renting land can also put you in the right neighborhood. So it allows you to get in touch and find some pieces of land or neighborhoods that you can find the perfect piece of land or the perfect neighborhood when it is financially feasible. Or maybe you rent land and 5 years down the road say, this isn't right for me. At least you don't have huge land payments that you have to make. But, with anything, there's downsides of that too. If you're investing in rental land for long-term soil building, you might not see all of that out of that. So that is a downfall too. So managing your overhead and keeping it low usually helps you balance capacity and growth though. So the second point on this slide, using labor instead of capital, it's kind of an old saying and you'll hear it, people are more flexible than machines. But, right, there's always a but. Hiring labor comes with its own set of challenges, and for those of you who have been on both sides of it, you know what those sets of challenges are, and maybe you're not a people person, or maybe you are a people person, but regardless of that, hiring labor instead of investing in bigger pieces of equipment or land can provide more flexibility in both growth and day-to-day operations than an investment in machinery does. So I'll give you an example of it, and that's one they use in the book. If you bought a Brussels sprout cutter, right, that you're going to put on a tractor, it can just cut Brussels sprouts off the stalks. That's all it can do. But if you hired a person to cut Brussels sprouts, one day they could cut them, and they could probably wash and pack them. And then the next day you could also have that person, if it's the right person, of course, have them go sell it at the farmer's market. The other factor is you also don't have to pay for labor on the days that you don't need labor, but you do have to pay for that piece of equipment on the days that it's sitting idle. So the other thing to think about is how much use are you going to have for those pieces of equipment. So when you're starting out, use labor instead of capital. It also allows you to think through things in a more timely fashion, or gears them a little bit more to your operation. So the scale of your operation you're running will also dictate this practicality. But it's always a question worth asking, would this job be better or more cost effective done by a person or a machine? Just keep that in mind. The third bullet point in trying to balance capacity and growth is flexible, keeping your infrastructure flexible infrastructure. And particularly I have on here fences and pack sheds. Now granted, we, when I first started farming, started grazing. And so I didn't want to put in temporary fences. I was on a rented farm. I didn't know how it laid. I didn't know the productivity of the farm. And so putting in temporary fences allowed me to figure out my farm better, allowed production practices better. It also allowed for herd growth. So if I were to build a permanent fence right when I started, I only had 60 cows. Well, by the time 5 years went by, I had 120 cows. That's a very different herd number. So planning for flexible infrastructure helps you balance the capacity and growth within that. Same with pack sheds. Those of you in vegetable operations, you'll know that building for flexibility and growth is important in both of those, and you guys can probably think of other infrastructure that's just as important to build that into. So be certain that what you put in place can accommodate for your future needs. We've all seen farms that build the perfect pack shed or the perfect freestall barn, and in 2 years everything is plump full and nothing is efficient, and they wish they would have done it bigger and better. And however, you also balance that with financial cash flow and financial outlay too. The other thing to think of, especially on infrastructure, is making sure that everything is sized appropriately so that your ceilings are high enough, your doors are big enough. So maybe you're not using a big skid steer now, or you're not using a loader tractor, but build for those components that you can grow and that down the road you won't have to make changes or redo something. The last point is just plan for expansion. Have a bigger picture in mind. Create steps so that if you want to add another barn, if you want to add more acres, that you can do so in steps, so that you don't put a building right in the way of, oh, I wish I would have put this here and not there, or that you could build on the end of it. Is super helpful. The other thing to consider is when you're planning for expansion is that look at where your existing buildings are. And so sometimes in those transition phases, when let's say you're going from step 2 to step 3, that especially when you're dealing with animals, where are they housed? What is the animal movement going to be? And that you think those through. There's nothing worse than disrupting cow flow or milking to have to get some of these things done. So if you can be mindful of it ahead of the time that you need to, usually the better off everyone is, and the better off hopefully financially that we are too, because we've thought things through. And even though you say, nope, I'm never gonna milk X amount of cows, I'm never gonna do 200 CSA boxes, whatever that number is, think of future expansion. The other thing it helps for is just saleability of your property potentially down the line. So that kind of takes us into this next piece. In your goal setting processes, we don't ever want to assume the worst, but think of what catastrophic situations could happen. I'm right now sitting on the western side of Wisconsin, and we've had 24 to 34 inches of rain in some place. No, we don't want to assume the worst, and some of my farms now have had 2 floods, one last fall and now this fall. So prepare yourself when things don't go as planned. We know they're not going to go as planned, and so the more you can prepare yourself, the better off you're going to be. Like I said, no one ever wants to think of these things, but I will tell you that unfortunately they do happen. So prepare several catastrophic scenarios and determine how they're going to impact your farm, both financially and production-wise. And usually one impacts the other, and all of you get that, but how does that happen? How are you going to mitigate the short-term problems as well as the long-term problems. So in the examples I have listed below, I've seen, but you're going to think of other examples that you have. So what happens if market prices fall below the cost of production? Right now in all of our organic dairy farms, we're seeing this happen as markets get tighter and as all of our dairy plants are full of milk. What happens? How long can we go? What's our plan B, or now what's our plan C? Second example is, what if you have a complete crop failure of one crop? Maybe it's your main crop. Maybe it's your secondary crop. So maybe it's not that big of a deal. But what happens if you have a complete crop failure? Some of these floods have taken out our whole crop, or maybe we don't even have soil left. It's all rock. So what happens with that? What happens if you're a livestock producer, if you have a significant disease come through and take out part of your breeding livestock? How does that impact what does next year, what does 2 years down the road look like? And then heaven forbid you or your partner is severely injured, or in some cases death, and we don't ever want to plan that, but what happens? You have to handle these situations and your farm doesn't stop. So I just, like I said, no one ever wants to assume the worst. You don't want to think through these things, but can you put together each catastrophic situation and then determine what's our money needs, what's our production needs, what's our people needs, and then will you have enough borrowing power to borrow money if that's what you need? How much of your savings will it take up? Ask your lender, run some of these things past your lender. If your lender does not appear to want to work with you under any of these catastrophic situations, you might actually want to look for another lender and move on. That indicates some things to you right there. Maybe that puts up some red flags. It's just much easier to respond to catastrophic conditions if you're prepared. No, you're never fully prepared, but a lot of people have been able to go back to some of our catastrophic planning and say, okay, here's what we said we're going to do. This is what we need to do. And we're going to make the best out of this situation and move forward. So I'm going to touch a little bit more on the goal setting and the planning process. Plan a formal time to reflect and look at trends. Minimum, I say do it annually. I like quarterly or monthly, just from a standpoint of annually actually is a really long time on most of our farms. So quarterly is going to seem probably sooner than like, whoa, we just met quarterly and it just seemed like we just met. So plan a formal time to really reflect and look at the trends and know how your business is doing. So what do you need? I would say sit down with your balance sheet, your income statement, the statement of your cash flows, your budget to actual report. So this one is really important, like when we're meeting quarterly on farms, even like mid-year. If you don't want to do it quarterly and you're just going to do it mid-year, where are you at budget to actual report? And if you're doing it just annually, review how your farm has fared in the previous year. But like I said, I encourage you to do it more, but look at all of those things. And the sooner you see some things going awry, or maybe it's not going as planned, you can take action sooner, or start asking questions to people on your team or people within your community that might be able to help you out and point you in the right direction. So the questions you want to ask is, did your income assumptions play out? Did we meet our needs? Did we meet our goals? Were your expenses under control? If not, what's out of control? How do we get them back into control? And then, just as importantly, have you planned appropriately for all your borrowed money? What is your line of credit looking like? Do we need more? Do we need less? And then, stepping back even one step a little further is, were your equipment replacements made on time? And this has been an important question when we're seeing 2 and 3 years of below market cost, is we're starting to see our equipment replacements are not being made. Stuff is starting to wear down. How do we prioritize those capital purchase needs? So asking, were equipment replacements made on time, is an important question in your planning process. Another one, have you been able to take enough time for family? Have you been able to take enough time for your family? And are your family living expenses being met? What are you and your family personally not, doing without or what's getting tight. And then, have you had the time you needed to do your management properly? So going back to that, are your records current? Are they up to date? Do you have the numbers you need to make all the decisions that you want to make in the correct time frame? And then, heaven forbid, you take any vacation time away from your farm. And I say that jokingly, but I encourage all my farms to get away, get out of the barn, get out of the pack shed, get out of the tractor. Granted, all of those places provide thinking time, but it is really important to leave the driveway, get out, see a bigger picture, remember what life is all about, especially if you have family and kids. All of those pieces fall into play, and they all have needs and wants, and it's important to honor those as well. So here again, I encourage each family member to privately write out their goals for the farm and their personal goals, and then this is a good time, like I said, whether you're doing it a minimum on an annual basis or quarterly, to come back together to discuss each member's idea. And there's some really cool things like 12-year-old kids can pick up on and they can be creative about, and you might laugh about it but then come back to it because it actually might be a solution. So we promise you'll have a very interesting and hopefully fruitful discussion when you do this. Some families do it better than others, but I still encourage you, no matter how painful the process is, to do it and honor each other. So the other thing that might come out of those discussions are things you'd like to change. So if there's things you'd like to change and it's not going to happen tomorrow or within a month, there again, write it down. Same with your goals. Write it down. How will you make the changes? Do the calculations that you need to, especially in the following modules that will discuss how to assess the financial impacts of any of your changes, but write it down, think about it, ponder on it. Maybe it will lead to some other points of discussion within other family members as well. So it's not on this slide. I have included the entire family or farm team, but I just want to reiterate that point, because the more that you bring your entire farm team to the table, and you don't have to bring your farm team to the table every time, especially if they're not decision-making members, but they will always bring new ideas to the table, and it helps them so that they feel involved and that you care and understand what they're seeing on your farm. And then usually your farm becomes more sustainable, or like I said, it builds more of that capacity and flexibility into it because they feel like they have some buy-in, or that you care and you want to understand. So I encourage every farm to do that as well. And building on that farm team is getting help from an advisory team. So just change slides here, but I have seen these advisory teams, or some farms call them success teams, or some farm teams call them financial management teams, whatever name you want to build for them. Usually it's a group of volunteers, so voluntary advisors, a farm can call on for help when planning or making decisions. Now, some of my farms will be very diligent about this. They might meet monthly, they might meet quarterly, but as this bullet point indicates, some of my farm teams are only formed when they need to make bigger decisions, or when there's planning that needs to take place. And an example of that is a farm transition plan takes place. Usually within the team, each member has a different knowledge or expertise, and you'll see on my example farm that show up. Each member should provide help and recommendations, but you're not going to give them the ability to make decisions for you. And you and I both know that people on your farm team will have stronger personalities than others, and sometimes they need to be reminded that they're not the farm business owners, but they're there just to make recommendations and help us to make sure that we've thought through everything so that you as a farmer can make the decision that's best for your farm. So an example that I see a lot I just gave an example of a livestock farm, is these are people you might have on your farm team, and you don't have to have all of them by any means. So perhaps the nutritionist that you work with, the veterinarian that you work with, and maybe you don't work with them, but it's a veterinarian that comes highly recommended. Your tax accountant, a local agronomist, or the agronomist that you work with on a day-to-day business basis. your farm business instructor, someone like myself that we come in as a third party that can look at some of these pieces and give you some insight maybe on those benchmarking numbers. Extension educators. A lot of the states still have extension educators. Maybe they're not in every county, but usually there's some specialists, and these people are usually more than willing to help sit in on farm teams. Your lenders, and maybe it's not your lender, maybe it's another local lender, realizing that some of the lenders may be asked to be paid, and so that top bullet point of voluntary advisors, maybe some of these say, all right, you will have to pay for an hour of my time. I can't stress enough that trusted area farmers are really good people to have sitting on your advisory team, and maybe they're not even from the local area, but you know that this has been a successful farmer that has gone through something similar to what you're looking at or where you want to go. So those are just a few possibilities. There's always good people out there to sit on your advisory team, and know that if you have an advisory team and someone's just not fitting into the group, you don't have to invite them back as well, and this can ebb and flow from time to time too. The last point is really good to have a facilitator to help set an agenda, keep everyone on that agenda, set the time frame, stick to the time frame, and to keep the discussion open and respectful. Sometimes these can be extremely touchy situations, and as a farmer, you know that yes, we need to make some hard decisions. Do we keep the cows? Do we sell the cows? Do we let our son come home but not our other 3 sons? How does that look? What does that mean for our family? So to have a facilitator that can do all of those things and keep everyone on track and meet your goals as a farm is usually really important. It's hard for you as the farmer to be the facilitator and the timekeeper and try and make your decisions. And you don't have to make your decisions the day the team meets, but to try and soak all of that in and be the facilitator is usually more than one person wants to juggle. The last piece on goal setting that I'll just throw in here is developing a business plan. More and more lenders are requiring business plans, but even if you aren't working with a lender, it's really good to have a business plan. A business plan is a multi-dimensional document that usually involves both numbers, so your financial documents, and word descriptions, like your goals, some of your vision, mission for your business, and it's over a given period of time. So sometimes they say 1 year, sometimes it's 3 years. It used to be a lot of them wanted 5 or 10 year business plans, but we're realizing those just aren't as common or as realistic. So a lot of times, as a farm business instructor myself, we're seeing the 3 year plans make sense. We can make it cash flow in 1 year, but what does that look like in year 2 and 3? As part of your business plan, include a market survey, and there's some more on how to do this type of stuff in the book as well as online, and maybe someone's already done a market survey, so looking at those numbers, taking that into consideration within your business plan. Having a balance sheet today, having a balance sheet after the first year, after the second year, and in the third year, so a post-close balance sheet, those might be called. What is your projected income and expense statements of this particular business plan? What are the budgets of each individual enterprise that you have within this business plan? So you might have a budget for carrots, you might have a budget for cabbage, or on some of our vegetable farms, we might have a budget for just the farmer's market or just our wholesale market. Or if you're on a livestock enterprise, what's the enterprise budget for the dairy cows? What's the enterprise budget for the heifers? What is the enterprise budget for the corn silage and the hay that we're growing? All of those budgets need to be included, which also trickles into that projected income and expense statement. And like I mentioned earlier, having a vision, mission, and goals for the business, it goes into those word descriptions and says, this is who we are, this is what we're about, and this is where we're going. So just a summary on the whole goal setting and planning your farm is just take the time to plan. And for some of you, this is going to be a struggle. You just want to jump in and you want to go. And I fully appreciate that from someone who has done that. It is important to take the time to plan. Farming involves a lot of factors that are out of all of our control, but if you take time to plan, it helps you plan for flexibility and resiliency. The third one, be intentional, informed, and focused about your planning for your farming operation. And include others. Have others at least look over your plan, criticize your plan, give comments, give options. And last, it goes right into that staying flexible. You obviously have to make decisions, but if you can stay flexible, it helps you be informed and focused about other things as well. And last, the picture was one of my farms that says, a dream written down with a date becomes a goal broken down into steps becomes a plan backed by action becomes reality. And so my goal is that you guys would all plan and your plan gets put into action and it becomes reality. Is it going to be perfect? Nope. But hopefully we have a lot of successful farms for our future and for our future generations. So this concludes the second module of goal setting and planning your farm for the series of Fearless Farm Finances. If you're just getting into this as the first module, there is a whole series of modules on the Fearless Farm Finances, and you can find all of those webinars at the link on your screen. And these are all being funded from a USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture in the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. So we thank them for sponsoring and awarding the funds to make this possible.